Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Shishir Modi ji, Mr. Gupta, Anurag, everybody who has come here, all of us with the mindset of business and value creation, which is essentially the essence of anything which is of permanent value. That is everybody's effort to create. Often people ask me, and today is also no exception, and we were chatting and people say, so how is business? And how is the time going on currently? And sometimes I wonder whether I should say it's a good time or it's a bad time. I think to myself, isn't it a bad time today? And there is no doubt that it is very cyclic. Sometimes it's a good time, sometimes it's a bad time. Isn't it a bad time? Because the definition of the bad time is if you can't predict tomorrow with certainty, for the business landscape it's a bad time. Because you can't do business properly, because you can't ascertain with certainty. But that thought, I shove it away, because the other thought that often comes to me, which makes it compelling for me to say it's a good time, is because I see a better tomorrow. Because when we see better tomorrow than yesterday, we begin to love it. And in fact, as business leaders, as government leaders, as people leaders, I think one of the biggest tasks that we have is to create tomorrow. Not only just to see a better tomorrow, but to create a better tomorrow. And to do this, obviously, two things often come to my mind that people do. One is change. And nothing is possible of permanent value if we do not change. And therefore, one of my heroes is always Charles Darwin, who said, it is not the strongest of the species who survive, nor are the most intelligent who do. Only those who are most adaptable to change are the people who survive and become successful. And the second thing that I think becomes essential to create a better tomorrow is the value creation platforms. What fundamental, structural change people do with their efforts, with their thoughts, which can become as a very strong value creation platform. These are the two things that I am reminded of when I think of Bihar. Very symbolic of what we have seen in the last few months, years, recently, under the leadership of Mr. Nitish Kumar and Mr. Modi, that I am always reminded of how you can create a better tomorrow. And I think that's very important whenever we talk of markets and business. Thinking about business, I think what creates business are the markets. So I'm a business person, I represent Canon, and for me the life is all around business and business opportunities. And when I look around, obviously what can create my business is the market. And what creates markets to my mind are the economic activities. You can never create a market unless there is an economic activity. And what creates economic activity, it is debatable, but what creates economic activity, according to me, is a good governance. You cannot create economic activity, ladies and gentlemen, to my mind, unless there is a strong governance. And the reason is simple. Economic activity means what? Only investment and consumption. So more consumerism and more investors expanding and investing. And both these things only happen when there is a reasonably good degree of governance. There are, coming a little bit onto the marketing side, and then relating it to the emerging markets, some thoughts that I can share with you. First of all, what are the enablers of transformation? Whenever we look at markets, whether emerging or whether developed markets, but what are the major enablers of? There is no doubt that first most important thing today is the globalization. In other words, the point of production and the point of consumption are no more the same. So not only the globalization creates enormous opportunities for doing business, but also tremendous opportunities for consuming the most competitive, the best product or services. The second big transformation that happens, or second enabler of transformation, no doubt, is the demographics. And I think whether it is for Bihar or any emerging markets, there is no reason, or there is no doubt that demographics are going to continue to play a very important role whenever we talk of emerging markets, new opportunities, marketing consumptions, growth, etc. The demographics would continue to play an important part in this. The third big enabler to my mind is the media consumption. And I think therefore this is very apt today to see this event being organized by Dainik Jagran, and through your vehicle of media, there is a very strong reason to expect a higher consumption, and therefore transformation to my mind. And the fourth thing that would provide a transformation from a marketing standpoint is this whole technology that's happening around. When we look at emerging markets, I see these as 4,000 markets as the opportunities of tomorrow. And these are the 4,000 cities that many of the brands are doing business in. We don't do business in so many towns. We do business in 400 cities because of the kind of product category that we are in. But many companies are doing business in 4,000 cities. So basically we are talking about how can in India we are planning for the marketeers, how are we preparing ourselves to look at these 4,000 cities. And when we look at these new cities, so to say, or new markets, so to say, markets of consumption and markets of new economic activity, very interestingly, we notice, and we often do this kind of analysis, that places where the market's expansion is higher are the places where law and order definitely plays an important role. It is not an area which usually marketeers would think about and talk about, but it has a very important role when it comes to the market expansion or the consumption. The second important part, of course, is infrastructure. I remember once upon a time, about 15 years ago, 20 years ago, I used to work for a company selling fans, Usha fans. And I went to Bihar, and we were doing business, and I went to the dealer, and because the dealer had sold nothing for the last 20 days, not a single fan. And we were asking, and I was a sales manager, and I asked him a simple question: why have you not been able to sell a single fan for the last 20 days? And in my mind, I was preparing that he's going to be a little bit defensive, and he's going to say, sir, the market is competitive, your prices are high, etc. He said, sir, the only reason is because fan can only be sold and can only be used if there is electricity. For last 20 days, my city hasn't had electricity, 20 days, and therefore I couldn't sell a single fan. No doubt that things like this become an important part in emerging markets, and I'm glad to see that the theme today, which is Bihar, this is the other area that is going in for improvement, and we are beginning to see this. Today, 20 years later, just last week we were talking to our partner in Patna, and we were talking about him, about the business, and congratulating him because he won an award for the best dealer in the emerging market category. And we were asking him about how is the business happening in Bihar, etc. And he said, why don't you come over? And I said, okay, sure, I'll come. But he said that Mr. Kalam also came to Bihar, and he was feeling very proud to say that Bihar could attract Mr. Kalam to come there. Maybe he went there to address some meet, etc. And then he said there was a World Kabaddi some contest which is happening in Bihar, and he rattled on and on. And he said, sir, there is very interesting thing. He told me the other reason, and he said, at middle of the night I see couples and families going around, etc. And what a great opportunity for night photography, he said. And therefore, for your business, it's a good time. So this indicated to me that there is a good confidence in that market, and therefore, I think a good reason for us to expect a better growth there. And the last thing that I notice in any emerging market is the hope. And all emerging markets in India, and I'm going to now share some statistics with you before I close. Every emerging market has indicated a strong hope for tomorrow. And that is what has given reasons to marketeers for investing. Looking at the 400 towns that we do business in, just a couple of statistics, you will find it very interesting. It's all, not only just Bihar, but all emerging markets. We break the country into 3 categories: top 8 towns, the next 20, and remaining others. In our case, and we are a technology company, and we are a company that needs the products need electricity, of course, and it's a technology company. It is being used by people who are a little bit aware about how technology products can be used, and yet 1/3 of the business of Canon, which is now 2,000 crore company, comes from the 3rd category of the emerging markets. But the interesting thing here is, in terms of the growth, while the company grew 30% this year in the first 6 months of calendar year, 15% was the growth in the top 6 cities. The consumption sentiments are down, of course, and of course to some degree some saturation is beginning to happen. The next towns, next 20, grew at about 30%, but the interesting thing is that 1/3 business that I just mentioned, which came from emerging markets, grew at 60%. So we are now seeing a multiplier of 3. So now the question is, what is the cost of marketing? If the growth is 3 times more there, is the cost 3 times more there? It isn't so. In fact, we notice that the cost of doing business in emerging markets is half of the cost of doing business in a developed market. The last point that I wanted to share is how do we build markets in emerging cities? Bihar, of course, is one of the important markets for it. There are 3 things that we look at. If 1/3 of our business comes from this emerging group category, and if that category is growing at 3 times higher than the first category, obviously there has to be a strategy that companies like us will have to roll out, which is futuristic and which shows a roadmap of the next 5 years of how those markets need to be developed. There are 3 things on which, to my mind, marketers have to work on. The first thing is the customer value. And customer values are not the standard value from a producer standpoint. Customer values are defined purely from the way the customers perceive it. And therefore, in evolving markets, the value need to be tweaked a little bit because of how they are going to perceive what you're delivering. Second thing is the customer connect. The engagement and the relationship programs become very, very important. In our case, it becomes very interesting when we do various events around photography in the emerging markets because the participation is huge, involvement is huge. And the third thing is customer trust. The degree of customer trust, or shall I say, the cost for building customer trust, of course, is a lot cheaper in emerging markets. We notice that. But it evolves around a lot of things, including your delivery, promise, and services that we offer to customers. We also notice that in emerging markets, partnerships and alliances become easy. We also notice that the loyalty of customers and the repeat customers become more. So that is the reason why the cost of marketing in emerging markets becomes lesser. I think the impact of the media cost is cheaper, and the impact of the media cost, therefore, in relation to the developed markets becomes lesser. Clutter is a little bit lesser. And finally, before I sign off, when we look at the next decade, I think marketeers will not see India as one market. I think marketeers will see India as a cluster of many markets. And these different parts of India will have different approaches in marketing, maybe different marketing tools, different techniques, depending on how that market is being developed on these parameters that I just shared with you. With that thought, ladies and gentlemen, all the best for this event, and it is good to be here. And I have to tell you that this whole approach of building emerging markets in India is very promising, and for marketeers, although the overall situation is not very comfortable today, these days, in the business environment, but if there is one silver lining in this, it is in the emerging market category. Thank you.